All right, thank you everybody for joining us. I'm really excited for this conversation and so happy to see lots of folks I know and lots of folks I don't know here. I'm going to start with a few introductory slides and then we will dive into the conversation. Okay, gotta move that. All right, please go ahead and introduce yourselves in the, oh, sorry, this always happens. Please go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. And this will be, we'll probably have a nice size group that will enable lots of us to talk throughout. But for the moment, because it would take too much time to have everybody introduce themselves, you can just put your name and your neighborhood council if you know it, or any organizational affiliation or whatever, and what brought you here today. And also, if you can add into the chat what city charter reforms you would like to see. So not just what brought you here today, but we're going to talk partly about city charter reforms and partly about we're talking mostly about city council size though, but there's such a vast array of reforms I think many of us realize we need in this city. So if you can add that as well, that would be fantastic. And what we'll do is collect those and we'll be looking at those as we go forward over the years. We're not going to get it all done this year or next year, but we can get started. Okay, our mission at the NCSA is to advance sustainability and resilience across LA through advocacy, sharing of best practices, and community action. We have a bunch of active committees and working groups. So you're welcome to join all of these, and we'll hear report backs from, I think, most of these at the end of the evening. We are recording this meeting. Please, and if you're talking, and even if you're not talking, if you can maybe change your name so that we can see your neighborhood council and maybe add your pronouns, and be sure to introduce yourselves in the chat, and you can use the raise hand feature to participate. And we do have community agreements that we will ask you to follow, and we will ask you to follow them. We do kick people out if they don't follow them. So we just want everybody to remember that. And lastly, we do have an evaluation. It really helps us to make sure that we're providing content that is of value to you. So we really want to hear from you what you like and what you don't like, etc. Okay. Today we're going to talk about how big our city council should be, and then we'll have a separate conversation that everybody is welcome to stay for about the Vista Hermosa oil wells, which are in Echo Park, and why they are a problem and what we can do about it, how we as the NCSA can support the community in Vista Hermosa to try to find resolution. Then we'll hear back from the committees that I just mentioned, and then anybody at the end is welcome to make announcements, and then once again, we'll ask for evaluations. Here are our community agreements, which we do take seriously. If you can, not everybody can, but if you can turn on your camera and show your face, that's really nice because it helps us build community. We ask people to assume good intent, give people the benefit of the doubt. I find that that's really, really helpful. Demonstrate respect and appreciation. And to me personally, that means you don't have to respect or appreciate somebody, but you do have to pretend that you do here. So keep that in mind. We love the chat. We want you to use the chat. The chat is there for you to use, but we do want it to stay on topic and not to be too tangential. Listen intently, and then also step forward and then step back, meaning contribute, but let others do the same. And if you're the kind of person who talks a lot, maybe you hold back. And if you're the sort of person who is a little bit more reticent, maybe you push yourself and you chime in a little bit more. Be as concise as possible, because that gives us the opportunity to hear as many folks as possible. And of course, have fun, because there's no point in doing this if we're not having fun. Okay, this slide is here to remind me to introduce myself and ask the rest of our board to introduce themselves because I usually forget that. Chris, so I should start. My name is Lisa Hart. I am now the executive director of the NCSA and on the board. And Chris is our chair. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself, Chris?
Yes, thanks, Lisa. Christopher Huja, Chair, the NCSA, also a Tarzana Neighborhood Council board member. And good to see everybody here this evening. It's going to be a good conversation.
Yes, and Charles, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I shall. Hey, everybody, Charles Miller. I'm on the NCSA board. I am also on the Palms Neighborhood Council and chair of the Los Angeles Climate Reality Project. I also want to take a very quick moment to invite everyone here to a tour that was announced in the LA Times for July 16th at the Paul Koretz Westwood Greenway. And I thought this would be a good time to drop that in there. It's going to be at 10 a.m. on that Sunday, and we'll meet at the Northwest Gate. You can find out more at westwoodgreenway.org.
Thank you, Charles. Muriel, go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon, oh, good evening. Oh my God, good evening, everybody. So I am an NCSA board member. I'm also the chair for the transportation committee. So you'll probably hear me at the end of the evening, rehashing what we had at our meeting, what we talked about at our meeting. And yeah, I would also want to plug the Westwood Greenway because I helped remove the non-native plants from it.
Great. And is Alex, we have a new board member, Alex. I don't know if she's here. Does anybody else know?
Yeah, Lisa, hi, I'm here.
Oh, okay, I don't see you, but please go ahead. This is her first time doing this, so she's she's new to the how this works. But Alex, please go ahead and introduce yourself. We're so grateful that you've joined us.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Alex Tangalos. I'm the newest member of the NCSA board. I'm also a member of the transportation committee, and I'm very happy to be here.
All right, great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight our three speakers who are joining us. I'm going to introduce all three of you briefly, and if you want to add more once I've done introducing the three of you, feel free to go ahead. Then I'll have some questions for you. And of course, as usual, we'll open it up to everybody who wants to chime in. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a comment, an opinion, whatever. So first, Russia Chavis Cardenas. She is with California Common Cause, the Voting Rights and Redistricting Program Manager. And I looked up, I've known of them for many years, but I was like, what exactly is their mission statement? And I found this on their website. We work to ensure that every vote counts, that every eligible voter has an equal say, that our elections represent the will of the people, and that our government is of, by, and for the people. So that sounds pretty noble. So I really am excited that you're here, Russia. And then Councilmember Paul Koretz, so grateful that you are here tonight. We are really excited. It occurred to us when we were talking about this that it would be wonderful to have somebody who's actually, you know, it's nice to talk to the experts, and you have actually been the person who's doing the work that we're going to be talking about tonight. So it makes absolute sense to have a city council member here, and perfect sense actually to have somebody who is not in office now, because we have the idea that you can speak as freely as you like, because you can speak with impunity. So we're excited to hear your very candid thoughts on this subject. And then Rob Quan, who I've gotten to know over the last several months as this issue has heated up. And he is the founder of Unrig LA, and also the convener. I made up that title. I don't know if that's the right title, but the convener of Fair Rep LA. And I don't see Russia. Where did she go? Is she not spotlit anymore? I'm going to try to do that again. Don't know what happened. And Fair Rep LA is really focusing on this issue. And I have, oh, there you are. You're back. Okay. I've learned so much from the Fair Rep LA Coalition, and so I owe all of that to Rob. He's truly, he is a living, breathing encyclopedia. Oh, I don't want to, do I need to be somebody spotlight me? That's what happens when you get a co-host. Okay, maybe that's a good idea. I didn't think about that. So I would like to ask, first, I'd like to ask, how did we get here? What struck me is that, this has been a conversation that some of you have been following for years and years and years. This conversation, the question of how large should our city council be, is relatively new to me. Although I have attended Rafe Sun and Shine Civic Universities, and he has discussed this issue. That's something for neighborhood council folks. If you haven't attended that, and if we still have the opportunity to have that experience, it's really, really helpful in terms of understanding the landscape of Los Angeles. But we're now at a point where it seems to me, and some might disagree, that instead of asking, should we have a larger city council, it seems that the question now on the table is, how big should the city council? It seems that there's been a shift. So I'd like to open up, Rob, if you could take that first and let us know what you think about that. And also, if there's anything any of you want to say, please chime in. And if you want to add something to your introduction, to the introduction I made of you, please add that as well. Rob, you have the floor.
Thank you. And I don't think there's anybody you ask would be really hard pressed to throw out a specific number. There are a lot of variables, and we shouldn't just assume that increasing the size of city council is going to make redistricting easier if we actually don't have enough council members. We shouldn't assume that we're going to get better delivery of services if we're cutting all of their budgets across the board. So I think that we have to, consider what's being packaged in there altogether. I think that for us to address like some of the lowest hanging fruit with redistricting, we have to get in the range of like 23, 25 council districts minimum. I like 25 to 29 as a solid step forward for the city. But, I think we have to look at it from the perspective of, are we reducing the size of the districts so that we can more easily manage districts? Are we having enough members so that we can, actually redistrict things in a way where we represent the diversity of the city? And are we reducing the size of the districts enough so that we actually have really, truly competitive elections? So I look at those three things as kind of the most important pressing things to consider and exactly what number we're looking at.
Okay, thank you. I think you did that like a true politician, because I don't think you answered the question that I asked. So that was very masterful. But so I'm going to ask Councilmember Koretz, if you, and maybe you feel a little more freedom now that you're not on the city council, but if you speak to, because I'm asking this question because I think there are probably a wide range of levels of knowledge on the call. So I'd like a little bit of background in the history of like why this has been debated and why it's become such a hot issue now. Councilmember Koretz, if you could speak to any of that, that would be helpful.
Well, let me start by saying I've had the opportunity to serve on a 15-member districted council in West Hollywood for 12 years, on a 5-member at-large council, and in the state legislature with a giant and unwieldy 80-member state assembly. And I think these ideas always made sense. They were always good government. They would always have made council members more accessible because of smaller districts, more accountable. I think it concentrates less power in the hands of such a small number.
Okay.
I think it always made sense, but there really is the drive now because we've actually seen the problems that this hopefully will help to solve. Voters tend to dislike creating more politicians. And so on the natural, the answer is no whenever this is proposed, unless there's a reason. Now there's a reason. I think we have some of the bad actions that we've seen from some of my former colleagues, and people are looking at ways to avoid that. Clearly, a cleaner redistricting process is necessary. That's been proposed, and that's not our primary thing to discuss here. But I think an independent redistricting process is necessary. I don't think the results were that terrible of this redistricting, but the discussions of how to get there were absolutely terrible and an embarrassment to the council and the rest of the city. As far as representation, I mean, we've seen people taking bribes of various levels on the council. Number one, having so few council members is a problem that leads to that a little bit. Having the process of it being a tradition that if a council member advocates for or against a project in their district, that the council goes along. And the few times where I felt the issue was so egregious that I had to vote, even if it was just a protest vote against a project, people treated me like I was a deity, like I had come down from the mountain and actually had the guts to vote against a project. I wasn't used to that as a West Hollywood council member. We always had divided votes and really got into the meat of development, and there needs to be a way around that. I think what's been proposed is probably as close to perfect as I would recommend. 21 districts plus 4 at large. And I think
Let me interrupt because I want to interrupt because my understanding, and I could be wrong because I am not as knowledgeable about this as Rob is, but my understanding is that proposal has come from the academic group. Is that correct? Okay.
And
Go ahead.
And wherever it comes from, I think it actually works. And maybe for one consideration that people haven't really thought of that much, which is we need a way to break this habit of just deferring to one council member. I mean, that sort of created the Jose Huizar situation. If you have 4 council members that represent a citywide constituency, they don't have to worry about, well, if I don't vote for your project, you're not going to vote for my project. And that would help to open things up and break that pattern, which I think is critical. I mean, it's difficult. I've thought about how do you avoid corruption. I mean, it's hard to spot everything. I know in the legislature decades ago, the FBI had heard enough about corruption happening that they did shrimp scam. There was an unimportant bill that was created, it wasn't real, and they offered bribes to all the members of the legislature. And I think 8 or 9 of them took it. And so after that, every year in the education that they give to new members, they kind of harp on that. Hey, anything you do, just assume it's going to be public because the FBI can come in and do something like this again. I don't think it would be a bad thing if there was an entity that once in a while offered something to every council member, and we knew it was a possibility, and it probably wouldn't happen again. But there are a lot of things that can be done. I think this reform is one of them. I think it's really the right number. When you get to too many, like I had in the state assembly with 80, I thought it was a horrible process. We just couldn't operate in a way that was really good for legislation and good legislative policy. On my worst day, I had to literally be in 7 places at once. And I missed committee meetings where I could hear about things that I needed to hear about to vote on, and I had to vote on them without the information. I had to make 3 presentations on 3 different bills of mine at the same time. It was impossible. And so I would avoid going the route that some of the other cities have gone with too many members. I think an increase of what's proposed is probably right on the nose.
Okay, you know, it's I should have, but I knew you'd been in those previous roles, but that did not even occur to me. And I think that's so fantastic that you have worked in those with those other models and so that really helps you be able to compare those experiences, which informs this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Russia, I'd love to hear what you bring to this, and also if you want to, what California Common Cause is thinking, how you folks evaluate this and what's important for you.
Thank you. We evaluated mostly based off of the principles of like good governance and democracy. So we're evaluating it. Remember, Common Cause, California Common Cause is situated as part of a national organization. So we're looking at this stuff across the nation, and we're looking at federal law and different state laws. So when we're evaluating it, we're thinking about what is good governance and what are good governance structures. And so we'll look at models across the nation. In my research and preparing for this, I've looked at models like Chicago, where they have really, really small concentrated districts. They're representing, the council members are representing about 55-ish or so thousand individuals. And based off our recommendations, we would probably say that is too little. Because if you look at the Chicago example, what happens in Chicago is you have council members really infighting, and they can be really narrow-minded in their thinking because they're only thinking about this really small constituency. So it doesn't broker for the opportunity to actually work across the aisle to think about public policy issues that have to be affected by the entire city. So we wouldn't recommend anything as small as the Chicago model, but we absolutely do not recommend staying at 15 where we are. We absolutely and fundamentally agree that the size of the city council should be increased. Understanding that some people think that when you expand the city council, I even saw it in the chat where you could potentially reduce the vote or reduce the voting strength of Black and Latino voters in the state. And so what you're seeing out of the academic report is where they're recommending that model, that hybrid model. What the academics are saying is, let's do the district elections, but they're adding this at-large component to capture what would happen. And so the evidence has shown that when you stay with a district-based election process, you do increase Black, Latino, and other minority individuals who have those council seats. What they've added in the at-large piece is that they're trying to gather that other diversity piece. And evidence has also shown that when you add that at-large component on top of it, you can get more gender diversity. And I think that's one of the reasons why the academics lean there. As far as an organization, I think we're neutral on how the city council decides to increase the mix, just understanding that it needs to be increased. And what we would fundamentally say is increasing the council size will bring representation down and will put a little bit more power in the hands of the people who are there. But we wouldn't go as far to be unwieldy like a Chicago because of the downstream impacts that it can have and how it can actually stifle governance.
Okay, that's really, really helpful. And a couple of you now have mentioned that report. Charles, I'm hoping you can do me a favor and pull the link to that report, which I probably did not label well, in the chat. And you can just, yell at me if you don't know which one it is. But it's the website is like lagovreform.org or something like that. In fact, it might be that.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Russia just put it there.
Did it. Perfect. You're way ahead of me. Perfect. Thank you. So I'd love to hear from any of the three of you or all of the three of you a little bit more specifically what your thoughts on the report were, what you liked, what you didn't like. And I will say, I'll start actually. I was struck by how, and I guess this makes sense because I have a background in research, and this is a very, very, very hard thing to evaluate because you can't actually create experiments to figure this out. So it's very hard to evaluate, but I was struck by the paucity of data on the subject. And so I realized one of the reasons this can be a controversial conversation is that we don't really know. We are a little bit, it feels to me, stabbing in the dark, if that's the expression. So that was my takeaway from the report, is how little we know. But I'd love to hear from any of you with a little bit more about the report. And to folks who haven't read it, It was short. I was able to read the whole thing. It was not painful, and I do not read long documents. So, yeah, Clara says read it. Okay. So anyway, I'll stop talking, and I'd love to hear from many of you.
I mean, for me, I didn't really, it wasn't surprising because I've thought all these things needed to happen for many years. I even was involved as a teenager in a reform effort in 1974 to increase the members of the Board of Supervisors, which I think Common Cause was involved in back then, from 5 to 7, which is pretty innocuous, but there's just so many people represented. I mean, right now, each supervisor represents 2 million people. It's too much. Most supervisors don't go to community meetings that often. It's just impossible to be spread that thin. I was involved also way back when in 1975, I proposed the LA Unified School District stop running district-wide elections and break it up into 7 districts so that there at least could be small enough districts where there could be a dialogue about issues. And I thought it would improve the district greatly. It improved the dialogue. It made elections real elections where issues were discussed. I don't think the school board got any better or worse, ironically. But I think these kind of proposals have been out there for years. It's just very hard to convince voters. I think now's the time. People recognize what's wrong. They're looking for solutions. I think this and an independent redistricting will go a long way, whether it's 21 and 4 or whether it's 25 in districts and 4. I think that's really the range between too unwieldy and not enough. And I think that really came across in the report, especially for most people who have not really given thought to this issue before some of the bad things have happened in the city that created the urge for more significant reform.
Okay, thank you. Rob or Russia, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I would say the thing I was hoping to see most was a more in-depth analysis of like the council expansion end of the conversation, just because the CLA's report really focused on redistricting and not so much on that expansion end of things. I think 21 districts is something that does not properly address our problem with dealing with representation of Watts with District 15. Just for us to be able to address that, we have to get up to 23, I believe. It leaves us with 200,000 people per district, obviously much better than 260,000, but that's still an extremely large district. So I think that, when we talk about the upper limit, I completely understand the arguments about Chicago with those districts being too small, or the sheer number of council members you have in Chicago and New York. That is definitely a problem. And that's a problem for advocates, because if we're going to have to get council behind something, that means that you got to get like 25 people behind something. So that's a whole lot of work that you have to do on the advocacy end of things. I do think that, part of the idea here is to increase the authority of the mayor so that they're not stepping out of council's activity. I think that's a problem. And 20, 30 years ago, you would see the mayor a whole lot more involved in the conversations that happened at city council. So I think that, part of the idea here is to recalibrate that balance of power at City Hall. And I think to properly, put the council president in check and to involve the mayor, you have to get around 25 to 30 members. I think some of the questions in the chat have been about diversity concerns and these at-large districts. This is something that Fair Rep LA, has never officially gotten behind. But if you go on our website, it's something that's mentioned as something that should be considered for the reasons that have been articulated. I think that to get into the weeds, something that's really important to consider is if we're going to have 4 at-large members, we would want to have all 4 of those seats filled in the same election, as opposed to staggering them and having 2 at a time and then 2 years later. I just mentioned that because I'm from Santa Clarita and we have a situation where we have at-large districts, and on one cycle you have 2 members on there, and on the other cycle it's 3 that are open. And that just really leaves you with a situation where only those elite candidates, often incumbents, are able to get past the post. Another really important thing to consider would be shifting to ranked choice voting, as that would really ensure that you're not just having a situation where the most powerful candidates are gobbling up, 4 votes from each voter, and that you're actually getting, a really accessible system. So I think that, in combination with making adjustments to the matching funds program, there have been some changes that have been made over the last years, in large part thanks to Councilmember Koretz and Mike Bonin. And those were really huge, but that does not do enough to solidify a campaign to run amongst 4 million people. So I think we would have to make an extremely large adjustment there. And with that, I think it could undercut some of those concerns about, diversity and how we've seen things work out in some other jurisdictions.
Right, you're highlighting the fact that it's really hard to talk about the size of the city council in isolation, as Councilmember Koretz alluded to as well, because there are so many other factors, and the devil really is in the details on this one. Okay, so thank you, that was super helpful. Russia, any other thoughts? Okay. So let's shift gears a smidgen. Well, I'm not sure which direction to go in. Let's talk about a little bit more deeply about corruption. I got feedback via email, and I can't really read the chat right now, but I've seen a little things that looks like it's the same thing. And Councilmember Koretz alluded to this as well. People think, well, we have 15 bad city council members. Why do we want 25 or 30 bad city council members? So could any of you speak to that a little bit more pointedly and talk about how folks are thinking this might actually help address corruption?
I think, Lisa, this is addressed with a suite of packages, right? And so just expanding the council size doesn't necessarily reduce corruption. Like, if I'm going to go in and be a corrupt council member, like, that's what I'm going to do, right? But I think what Rob was alluding to is that it's a suite of packages. And so in addition to increasing the council size, we want to think about an independent redistricting reform, and we want to think about ethics reform, right? And so we've heard, even at some of the listening sessions, we've heard for President Krikorian, sorry, they're being loud in my background. We've heard President Krikorian say, well, we've heard that, the Ethics Commission can make a proposal to the city council, but we have the authority not to, they can sit, right? I think Jamie put this in the chat too. And so one way to think about the charter reform really is pieces of a suite of packages. And so if we're going to think about increasing council size, that's one piece on our checklist that we want to check off. The other piece that we want to add to that is thinking about, what does our ethics reform look like? And is there a recommendation that goes in the package that says, if the Ethics Commission provides a recommendation, the council has to consider that recommendation, right? And so those are the types of things that we're thinking about in terms of a suite of packages. And we can have an ethics conversation with one of our ethics experts, Sean, at our office, who's all over this. But I think a lot of what Jamie was putting in the chat and what Rob was alluding to is a bigger piece of just beyond increasing the council size.
Any other thoughts? Oh, go ahead, Councilmember Koretz.
Well, I'll give you a quirky one that I haven't talked about much, but I've been in office for 35 years. I've only been offered a bribe once, but it was right when I first got elected 35 years ago. I was a brand new council member. A developer who was well respected, but modestly well known, not the hugest developer, said, "Hey, I have a property I'd like the city to buy as a pocket park." And he took me out there to see it. It was a reasonable deal. It was a good location. It was perfect. I said, I'll bring it up with the city manager. And as I was getting out of the car, he said, "And when it's approved, you'll find $20,000 in cash under your door at home." And I said, "Well, we don't do that kind of thing. I don't know why you offered this. I'm not going to propose it." But I also didn't know what to do. I mean, I'm a new council member. Who are they going to believe? I never heard of wearing a wire. So I just let it go. I didn't follow it up. But I did think Well, this guy has dealt with a lot of developments with a lot of other elected officials, and he doesn't even know me well. So it must just be his method of operation. I mean, how many people are there like that? And how much of that was going on way back then? How much of it is still going on? Well, I guess we found out in LA with at least a couple council members, it clearly was going on. And how do you avoid that? I mean, there are reforms that make it harder, but a circumstance like that, I think it could have been well hidden if one wanted to. So, I mean, we can do everything we can to make it less likely. I don't know that it'll ever be foolproof without some occasional outside help.
Okay, thank you. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to say, note, you know, that definitely 100% agree on the need for ethics reform. And there's been mention of at-large as a way to kind of, you know, diffuse power and get around individual members' discretion. I also want to shout out multi-member districts, you know, what Portland's moved to, where they have 3 members in each district. That's something that could also potentially address that. But even if we're just looking at,
I'm sorry, I want you to slow down, Rob. Can you explain that in a little more deeply for folks who aren't familiar with it?
Sure. In Portland, they just reformed their charter and moved to having 12 council members, with 3 of them elected from 4 districts. So there's 3 in each district, 4 districts total. And they are also using ranked choice voting. So it's a way to ensure that there's not just one local person calling the shots. And it also removes the zero-sum game that we have with when we're redistricting and trying to ensure like certain diversity and opportunity situations. So I just mentioned that because I know that's something that Mike's itching to talk about and plug, and I do think is worth considering. But even if we were just talking about increasing the number of districts, I think it does address 2 specific issues related to corruption, and they're not silver bullets, but I think they're really significant. One is when you have more members and you have a council president that doesn't have that same stranglehold, you're going to have people more willing to speak up and dissent. And I think that can be an extremely important thing, because when Jose Huizar was moving things through, he wasn't worried about dissent at committee. He wasn't worried about dissent at the full council. And I think having that there would be an important shift. I think the most important thing we can do with dealing with corruption is to not turn to the ethics commission or the DA or the FBI and hope that they can bail us out, because frankly, our bribery laws are so whittled down that you have to find the most blatant quid pro quo corruption to prove a case. So if we're looking at what our, you know, founding fathers believed to be the most important way we could, you know, fight corruption, that is through elections, competitive elections where people are able to vote out a bad politician or a politician that's not responsive. And for here in the city of LA, we went like 15 years without having an incumbent lose a council race. You know, that it took 15 years to even get one to go to a runoff, and we've seen 3 incumbent council members go down since. And again, that's in large part due to you know, shifting to aligning our elections with state and federal elections, but the motion that Councilmember Bonin and Koretz championed to lower the threshold so we actually have more competitive elections. And I think that's really, really important, because our politicians have been conditioned to feeling like they're untouchable and like they don't have to worry about being voted out of office. And I think that's why, you know, somebody like Jose Huizar over time evolved from, you know, really kind of small, low level stuff to really, you know, raking in trunks full of cash. And I think that that's something that would change if we had more competitive elections.
Sorry, I'm trying to make sure that somebody's being removed. There's some stuff that is just not.
It's done, Lisa.
Oh, good. Thank you. Appreciate that. So that's very helpful, Rob. I'm so glad that Rob is here, because like I said, he has encyclopedic knowledge about this stuff. So I'd like to switch gears a smidgen and talk about, for me as a regular person who's called, and as an advocate who's called lots of city council offices, I have been incredibly frustrated by how hard it is to get folks' attention, even an email back, a call back. I think it's such a problem. And I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but it's been my impression that people are there's sort of seems to be an unspoken assumption that if we have more city council members, we will have more responsive city council offices. I think that it strikes me as not necessarily a very well thought through argument. I don't think that's necessarily the case. It could be the case, but I worry that we are looking at something as a solution when it might not be the right fit to the problem. So I'd just love any thoughts that either or any of the three of you has on that. Well, at least one of you. Okay, go ahead.
I'm inclined to think that it would. Having been a council member with now, albeit in a district where constituents are very involved and give a lot of input on just about every development project, and where just about every developer wants to build in the 5th district, it was pretty overwhelming. I mean, you don't always have perfect staff. Every once in a while, you might hear that one staffer wasn't really as responsive as others. But I think part of it is that you're representing so many people, and there are both so many policy issues and so many district issues that it is somewhat overwhelming.
Okay.
And I also tried, and not everybody it does, and not everybody has even a fraction of the HOAs and NCs I had in my district. But I tried to go to everyone that invited me to at least an annual meeting and one other one a year. And I think we had 100. So it was really a crazy thing trying to get to just about every one of them, even just to meet with the groups and answer their questions. So I think there would be more responsiveness and more accountability and more accessibility. I mean, how much better it makes it, I wouldn't be able to tell you until we actually had the experience.
So let me push
I have no
back
doubt
on that. Let me ask you, with that, are you, when you say that, and this is very helpful, and I'm so glad you're here to think this through with me, are you assuming that you would have the same size staff? Or are you assuming that your staff would be proportionately shrunk to the size of the district? And does that change the answer to the question?
No, but I'm not sure it would be a brilliant idea to shrink the staff in each district. I don't know that you need the size of staff that each council member has currently, but I think while you're at it, not shrinking proportionally, I think would also get more responsiveness. And currently, council members are having to add a section of their staff that deal with homeless issues in a way that the council, even the first half of my time on council didn't have to do this. I mean, now it's an emergency and every council member has to do more. So I'm not sure I would plan on cutting every council member down to that level of staffing.
Okay, that's really helpful. Rob or Russia, do you want to add anything to that?
I was going to say, I agree with former Councilmember Paul Koretz. I do think that you will see increased constituent affairs and constituent services out of individuals who are able to represent smaller swaths of the population. It also depends, and the reason I say that it touches on a point that Rob was saying earlier, and that is when you bring folks down, it's ultimately the will of the people, and elected officials will realize, like, these are the people who elected me. I want to be reelected. I want to be a good member, and so I need to be responsive, and my staff needs to be responsive. You can't control all the staff, but I do think that you'll have more touch points and greater access, right? And so, and I'll give this personal example. I used to live in a part of LA County that was only the county. I didn't have city. I was a part of no city. And so I had one representative out of 2 million individuals. Getting the supervisor to address a serious health issue that we were dealing with in our neighborhood was almost impossible. It was almost impossible. It was just too big for the supervisor to manage. And so I think that having lived in different parts of the city, in different jurisdictions where I've been a part of really large districts or smaller districts, I have personally seen a difference and living in different parts of the city. And so I would agree with Paul that I think that you will see more responsiveness. Will it be perfect? That's yet to be determined. But the intention here, remember, if we're thinking about democracy and principles of democracy, is we're trying to bring power back down when we're thinking about this. And we're trying to push power back down to the people. And so that the people that we elect are responsive to us. And that's the intention with this reform idea, is push the power down.
Okay, I love that. Thank you. Rob, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think one thing I found really interesting is like paying attention to the campaign trail. And this is inclusive of, you know, just a lot of candidates, but even some that have been successful over the past few years. They'll say, you know, I think it's outrageous that you call your council office and don't get an answer. I'm going to promise that I will get an answer to every phone call or email within 24 hours or 48 hours. And it's like, I would be surprised if anybody in that role could actually live up to that and do it within 3 days. It's just, that would be your whole job. I think our council members really do have an impossible job, and some of this is intended to you know, pare back what's on their plate. But I think your point about, you know, assumptions is really valid, and that's something that, you know, the academics mentioned in the report. Well, maybe we should shrink the size of their staff, and I think that's something that I have a lot of reservation about. As Councilmember Koretz said, you know, like there could be certainly some reduction that's warranted. But, you know, making an assumption that, okay, we're going to double the size of council, so let's cut their staff in half, I think would be a really unfortunate trade-off. And I think one thing that I want to see out of this charter reform is people to tangibly be able to feel that there's a different city council in front of them. And I think when we look at something like Measure H and HHH, the biggest complaint about it is that it was too little too late. It took us 3-4 years to actually see projects like get completed. And by that point, we were really far in a deep hole. So I think that if we're going to be sending people, you know, real serious charter reforms, that we got to make sure that they're actually going to be able to see a really dramatic change in what kind of delivery of services they're getting, what kind of elections we have, and what kind of districts we're able to elect people from.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'd love to open it up. I know that I can't, I won't even read the chat until tomorrow probably, so I'm bummed I'm missing such a robust conversation, but let's bring some of that in, and let's bring in the other participants. Marianne, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Wow, thank you so much, Lisa and Councilmember Koretz. I appreciate you so much, and I don't know Rob and Rasha as well, but here's my off the top thinking. No expansion of city council. I am sorry. I have seen this digress to less interaction with the community. I will just say I was 19 years in city planning, 3 years with a city council member before that, like in the year 2002. I will tell you that the council member I worked for had a 24-hour turnaround, Rob. Yeah, where you would say, no, you're not going to solve the problem, but at least freaking respond to the email or the phone call and just say, got it. I'll get back to you. I got a lot of stuff going on. I'll get back to you next week. So there is, you know, if there's no communication, which is the reality of today, it's horrible. By the way, I'm retired and I worked on the neighborhood council for 2 years, and I saw firsthand how unresponsive everyone is to neighborhood council members, community members. It is such a BS going on there. I don't want to see any more of this. What I would like to see, Lionel, is he mentioned, but that's it. A valley, split it up. I am back to that. I'm back to that. I feel strongly about it. I feel that There is a disconnect with what the valley needs are compared to downtown. If not that, then I would say boroughs, but no more council members, because the council members today are singular focus. They are not serving everybody. They're just serving certain groups. And I'm so frustrated and disappointed. And I hope you can hear that. And I have no solutions except that I expect more and I care a lot. And thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to respond to her? Okay, that's fine.
I will just
go ahead,
say
Rob.
that I don't know the member you mentioned that had a 24-hour turnaround time. Like I would still challenge that. Like there are all kinds of random calls that they get, and sometimes with regular city staffers or people that are in front of those offices, they can be a whole lot more responsive. I'd also say that as the council member alluded to, like the job of an LA City Council member has changed a lot in the last decade. It's changed a lot in the last 20 years. And I think the amount of work that's on their plate and the type of work is very, very different. The type of work where you're dealing with the unwieldy nature of City Hall, but also LA County and LASA, which presents like all kinds of weird, unique challenges. And your frustration and desire to succeed, I completely get that. Our City Hall isn't working for you right now, and I would just hope that we can make some sort of attempt to make this city work. I like it the way it is, with its ugly, weird boundaries and everything that's within them.
Thank you. Okay, Mike.
Yeah, thank you for convening this discussion. Mike Feinstein, I'm a former mayor and city council member in Santa Monica. Like Paul Koretz, I served on a multi-seat body. Our council was 7. I was on for 8 years, 2 years as mayor. I've been representing the County Green Party in this process, and we believe that the process is destined to miss this historic moment as long as LA stays fixated on single seat winner take all districts. And I'll touch briefly on the ethics reform and the representation angles there. On ethics reform, I make the analogy that if we want safe traffic speeds, we don't keep just trying to lower the speed limit. We do traffic calming first, because just saying the speed limit is less and less, but having wide streets, people are still going to drive fast. Having single seat winner take all districts concentrates the power in one person's hands, no matter what. If we go like Portland and we have multi-seat districts, you have several people within a single seat district. It diffuses the power. There isn't one person to buy off, and you have people who represent different constituencies. So I just think the ethics reform is going to solve it, isn't going to solve it, because it's structural, because we concentrate too much power in one hand. In terms of representation, the ugliness we saw from the racist comments before was because the stakes of winning a single winner take all district, even if you have an independent redistricting commission, remain really high. If you have a proportional representation through ranked choice voting, you have different constituencies that can win representation within a district. Now, to get at the size of the district that our friends from Common Cause brought up, what the Green Party is advocating is a council along the size of New York or Chicago, either 10 districts of 5 or 17 districts of 3. When you do that, you still have larger districts, but you also are able to have multi-seat representation within those areas. That also lowers the threshold to get elected, which means less money. If you combine that with the existing public financing and the democracy vouchers, it will empower people from a variety of constituencies. Because when we look at the California Voting Rights Act, it talks about traditionally marginalized groups. What about different characteristics within a traditionally marginalized group? So all of those aspects are being missed. And even if we just go with an IRC and a council in the low 20s, it's not going to get at this moment. So I'll just close by saying Portland convened a charter review commission. It considered proportional ranked choice voting. They voted to more than double the size of their council and elect them from multi-seat districts. And I have put in a letter, which I copied in the chat, to the ad hoc commission on governmental reform to receive a presentation on how proportional ranked choice voting could work for LA. And I don't think that it should go to the council before that's analyzed. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. We have so many comments and I think we've already touched on that, so I'm gonna keep going. Liz, please introduce yourself and let us know what you're thinking.
Liz Amsden from Highland Park. I have the pleasure of Weezer as my council member. I now have KDL.
Sorry.
I have to say, I've heard a lot of idealism here today, and that gives me hope for the future. However, given the abuses of Garcetti's administration, I don't think the best way that I don't think we can rely on the mayor to give them more power to try and control the city council. We can't rely on our elections. We need to have personal accountability for these people. We must have severe, quick, and visible penalties across the board. We need accountability to follow people after they leave office. Too many of our elected officials are responding to the immediate demands rather than concern for the future, which is incurring and pushing costs down the road and onto the shoulders of our children. We need to have better enforcement of transparency and accountability for the mayor and for the city council members. A council member cannot be held accountable with so many interests within a council district of 260,000 people. It's better to have more people representing a fewer number of people who are knowledgeable and can relate to their constituents. 80 is definitely too many in both the expense and the inertia of bureaucracy, but 15 is definitely too few. The interests of downtown Los Angeles is definitely different from Northeast Los Angeles. And yet we have both CD1 and CD14 split between the two because they seek more funding from the downtown interests.
Let me interrupt, Liz. I feel like what Russia made an interesting point that I hadn't heard before, which is that there's actually some advantage. I'm gonna have to listen to this again and think through this again, but there's actually some advantage to having a council member represent different districts, because then they are forced to be more open-minded and less single focused, if that makes sense.
I have heard that argument before. I've lived through 30 plus years of seeing the interests of Northeast Los Angeles subverted to the interests of downtown Los Angeles, both financially and for the interests of the stakeholders. And that has been consistent across multiple council members. I would like to see 30 to 40 people, so that it's definitely below the 250,000, but maybe 100,000 or so. So twice Chicago's. And we need the staff to do the work because that is done for the people and not for the council members' pet projects or re-election campaigns. Thank you for giving the time.
That was a lot, and so I'm happy to have anybody respond, but I'd like to also throw in there, one of my concerns, selfishly, is about neighborhood councils, and as Rob alluded to, advocacy organizations, because I am concerned that neighborhood councils, although they are super, super, super dysfunctional and problematic, will be really weakened if we have such a high number of city council folks. Okay, that was a lot.
Sorry, I'd like to address that.
Sure.
Because we have neighborhood councils having to address 2 and 3, and I think in a couple of cases 4 council districts. If we ensure that with the redistricting, it's limited that they're incorporated into those areas so that we don't have to deal with it. I think that takes care of that problem. Maybe it's a different approach to it, but I think that what we have now is dysfunctional.
Okay, I disagree, but I'm not going to go there right now because we are short on time. Anybody want to respond to anything Liz said?
Just to the neighborhood council thought.
Yes, I do.
I really think part of the power of the neighborhood council lays within the council member who represents them, because some council members don't pay that much attention. We try to, as much as possible, be responsive to neighborhood councils. The few times where I clearly disagreed with the neighborhood council, they were quite offended But I tried my best to listen to them and follow their guidance, but not everybody does. And so part of that is going to be the response of the individual council member. And as has been noted, although not easy, if a council member doesn't pay any attention to their neighborhood councils and HOAs, you have the recourse of trying to get them out of office. And there seems to be a much greater willingness to do that in recent years.
Okay, thank you. Sophia.
Yes, I was interested in participating and I thought this would focus more on sustainability. But my background is in history. So when I hear comments about breaking off the valley, it's very disturbing. And if you look at historically, I like to follow the money because that's what this is all about. It's funds and the very wealthy and the very powerful that have controlled our system. But you have 170 years of segregation over and the redlining. So if we really want to deal with equity and inclusion, you have to deal with funding those communities of color that are not included. And even though you may have a representative of color, they're not of culture and consciousness. They're still part of a machine who takes away the voice. And I think when we talk about sustainability, when you have the state passing legislation that overrides us locally, that is what we should be worrying about, because then there is no self-sustainability. It will be build and build and build that will destroy our environment. And that's what's happening. And you can talk about the elected officials who are fronts for their handlers and these huge campaign consultants that control the city of LA. That's a larger picture. And so I just wanted to be included in this. And when I look at the institutions that put these studies together and look at the qualitative data, there isn't any. It's not inclusive. And these same institutions are a part of the gentrification and part of some of that elite thinking that has excluded the bottom. So it's a class issue as well. So I want to continue to stay engaged, but I really hope this group focuses on sustainability and it empowers our neighborhood councils. And when you look at charter reform, when these neighborhood councils were created, it took away the power of homeowner associations. When you look at the way you vote, just a simple vote, if that councilman stacks that neighborhood council, the community is always going to be left behind because it's set up that way mathematically. So that's the history of the neighborhood council when they did that charter reform. So we also have to deal with an avalanche that's coming, an avalanche that's already here, where you have corporations buying up property and they're not from this country. And so we have to deal with that. And with Airbnb,
Okay, Sophia, I'm sorry, I'm just very worried about our time. So I think you've made the gist of your point focus on this conversation.
Can I close with my last statement is that at large, I think that's going to be challenged legally. That's another form of the systematic segregation and white supremacy that existed in the past. We don't want to go back to that type of exclusionary participation, because if you want to run an at-large election, the most marginalized can't afford it. Thank you.
Well, I think we touched on other reforms would be necessary to enable that. So we do need, and we've worked on that. We've supported democracy vouchers, which would help with that issue. But I hear you. Does anybody else want to respond to anything else she said? Go ahead, Rob.
I just want to, there's been some question about what does this have to do with sustainability? And I started caring about money in politics and government reform because of how I saw LAPD get treated with kid gloves at City Hall. And, sometimes these things are only like marginally related, but I think there is a relationship with sustainability and one, having our districts more usable for delivery of services. After the uprising in 2020, there was an attempt to redistribute funds and prioritize lower income districts. And, we had a couple council members say, like, our districts are really terrible for measuring our communities and comparing different communities. So having smaller districts does help that. And I think the bigger thing is with getting away from urban oil drilling or moving to 100% renewable energy, these things took way too long. And anytime you're trying to get something going at City Hall, the first thing a council member that you get them to bite, what do they say? Okay, find me a second. And I think that getting some of these conversations broached earlier would happen with a larger body. I think getting that inertia, getting multiple members really engaged in our committees and doing the work, I think it becomes a little bit easier to do that. So I think it's about changing that dynamic, because really everything you're talking about as far as sustainability and the issues you care about, to do them right at City Hall, they're kind of third rail issues. So I think we do need a very different environment where our elected officials are responsive and feeling the urgency of the moment and saying like, all right, we really need to dramatically change our city.
And if I could add, although these were sort of off topic things that were brought up, but the effort to take back control of development issues from the state, there is an initiative drive, which is in the beginning stages, to put on a constitutional amendment to take back local control of the development process. So for people that object to what's been going on at the state level, keep an eye out for that. A thought as far as neighborhood councils, I found generally that they tend to be a little more pro-development than HOAs, although it works both ways. And as a council member, I listen to neighborhood councils and I listen to HOAs, and take each one as a separate entity, and try to serve their needs and their desires. And sometimes they disagree, and you just listen to the points that they make and go forward with the best concept. I don't think one has really overwhelmed the other.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Nish, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. Nish Grishamurthy, Sustainability Liaison for the Downtown LA Neighborhood Council. I just think as part of any council reform that might happen, I think part of it should include how we deal with council members or a vacated seat, because the council member might have stepped down due to criminal charges, or if I believe the council has some power to censure council members if they've been charged and kind of force them to temporarily sit down, if I'm not mistaken. So, having lived in downtown for many years, right? I've gone without council representation for many months, actually maybe around a year. And I don't think the constituents should be penalized without representation at the city council because one of our city council members turns out to be corrupt. So I just think I just wanted to raise that point and think, that should be addressed and part of any kind of reform. Thanks.
Okay, I'm not going to ask for them to respond because that's a little not the focus, but thank you, Nish. Clara, go ahead. Or Clara, I don't know which, sorry.
Hi, so I'm from Highland Park, and I am very concerned looking at the numbers. I started going through the list that they provided of the mixed at-large districts. And I looked at Houston, and Houston was pretty diverse. Their district-wide representatives, but then you look at their at-large, and they're largely white. And I started looking at Nashville, and it looked like that it was going that way, but I ran out of time before this meeting. And so I don't understand how you would think that this is going to, we're already not that diverse in terms of Latinos representation in the city of Los Angeles. And it seems like this plan would make it worse. Then the second issue I just wanted to say is I don't think increasing the city council size is going to help corruption in any way. And having at-large representatives, I don't think is going to end the corruption. I think I like more representation because I think communities like Koreatown, Chinatown, a lot of our different communities, they should have the ability to elect someone of their choice. And so that's why I like expanding the board, is so we will have more representation, not to deal with corruption, because corruption, I think, is going to have to be dealt with more in depth with deeper solutions. The ethics committee, I don't know what they do, but I don't see them doing much, so I think that's one place we have to look. But those are my thoughts.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt. I'll just say briefly, my understanding is that the Ethics Commission has been a little bit hamstrung, if that's the expression, by City Council. And also Jamie York is going to be our next speaker, and she's just been nominated to join the Ethics Commission, which is very exciting. But did anybody want to respond to her? Go ahead, Russia.
I do. I think because we keep saying the recommendation, I just want to remind you that the academic recommendation is only one set of recommendations that's out there. They're the ones and the first ones who've come out with this idea of let's do district-based elections and then add on top of some at-large elections to iron out for maybe what they're considering like gender diversity. That's what they're saying. That's the only recommendation that has that, and that's the academic recommendation. There are other recommendations out there, like think of the CLA report, the Chief Legislative Analyst report. Their recommendation is mostly centered and focused on district-based elections and just increasing the council size. That's kind of what they've put forward. And then there's other organizations like our LA who've thought about, increasing council size to a different area. And then there's Fair Rep LA who has a set of recommendations thinking about district size. And so I don't want us to only focus on this at-large issue because, we know historically that at-large elections traditionally only produce the folks who can have the most money, and they produce, white electeds. Whereas district-based elections, also they have a less chance of being challenged based off of, Voting Rights Act violations, and also produce more electeds of color. And so let's not just only focus on this academic report. I think there's multiple recommendations that are out there on how we want to structure those districts and what that council size looks like. I think there's multiple ways to think about how do we retain the diversity in LA because it is so unique. And I just want to remind folks that there's multiple recommendations out there.
Thank you. And
Can I note one thing?
Sure, go ahead.
When you look at district-wide elections in Los Angeles, we have 3 elected positions. And we have elected relatively diverse groups of people to those offices. We've had 2 Black mayors, we've had a Latino mayor, we've had an Asian controller, we've had a variety of city attorneys. I mean, it really hasn't been the kind of major issue that it would seem. Now, whether you could run for a lower visibility office like a citywide council office, well, city attorney and controller are very low visibility, lower visibility than those. So I think it'll happen. I think if it were 25 district citywide seats, it would be a disaster. But just adding 4, I think, is an interesting idea. I'm not adverse to doing 25 seats by district either, but there are pluses and minuses to the tiny number of citywide seats.
Thank you. And Rob, I don't know if it's in the chat, but I want to make sure that you or Charles can put in the Fair Rep LA website because that has, there's a ton of great resources on that site, including the Chief Legislative Analyst report that Russia is referring to. Yeah, thank you. Jamie. And congratulations, Jamie.
Thank you. So the first thing I want to say is that if you or your NC is interested in this, the council file is 22-1196-S1. I highly encourage you to leave your own public comment with what you would like to see for the city, or if you're on a neighborhood council, to agendize a CIS and talk about that with your neighborhood council about what specifically you would like to see. For me, a big thing that I'm passionate about is that we absolutely have to have ex parte communication reform, in that we need to ban it entirely. Because we can't have an independent redistricting commission if people are able to have essentially secret communications. But I love hearing this, but something that it makes me think about a lot is that so much of the things that we change in our city are in response to what are essentially disasters. The reason neighborhood councils exist is because of the failed secession movement. Part of the reason that we have campaign finance reform has been in response to things like Huizar. We're only talking about independent redistricting and expanding city council because of the Fed tapes. And so I think the thing that I would like to pose to the speakers on this panel is, how do you think council expansion can help us address having a city council that is more proactive in the way that it thinks about the future of our city rather than reactive? Because I think that that's the thing that frustrates me the most, is that we're always reacting to bad things instead of thinking ahead as to how to make the city not have these problems. So that's my question for the panel. Thank you.
I think it's
That's
sort of,
also a smidgen off topic, but I will give you a, yes, go ahead.
if I could say, it's a little bit of human nature to react to issues that present themselves. I mean, just as an example, David Rue, who is probably our most active reformer on the council, proposed a number of things which barely could even get a second. There were some things that I was going to co-author with him, but I couldn't co-present it because he had no other second. But then as some of these issues have popped up, there are more attention to the exact same proposals. So I think it tends to be that if you have a good idea, people look at it as, well, it's a good idea, but it's a solution in search of a problem. When something direct hits you in the face, that's more like when people are ready to deal with it. And I think that's true of these issues. There's been a lot of discussion of all of these things, but there was no real push because there wasn't as visible a need.
And I think Rob made an interesting point earlier. I think what I understood from you, Rob, is that just statistically, just because of sheer numbers, if you have more people, there's a greater likelihood that you will find somebody who's going to lead the way on something that might be more proactive instead of reactive.
Yeah, and I don't think, you know, it's not as though we're getting like brand new shocking revelations with some of these things. Like we had scandals that predated the scandals that predated those scandals. There was a time where I could go to city council and mention sea breeze, and that would get people really feeling cagey, and that seems really cute now. But like a lot of our problems that we try to deal with and tackle, it takes us, you know, a number of years to maybe get something introduced and get a report back, and then it just takes us way too long to address certain problems. And I think some of that just entails having a bit more nimble of a body that's more responsive and actually able to focus on these policy issues. And I think that's something where you look at like the Budget and Finance Committee, like we've got 5 members on that representing 4 million people, and like it's 60% white. Having more diverse committees where they're able to like spend time and really dig in is something that I think needs to happen.
Okay, that's really helpful. Okay, I'm going to try to wrap up this conversation and transition us to the Vista Hermosa conversation, but I want to honor the people whose hands are raised. So call in user 1, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hart, I need to address something with you. Last week you were emailed regarding this meeting. I have a client that I'm representing regarding access to this meeting. The person is deaf and needed assistance under the voice carry over relay system, and you never responded. So on a Sunday night, I'm dealing with this. I find that very disheartening, and I really wish you would provide some type of ADA assistance rather than ignoring. I really don't like wasting my time on Sundays like this. And you could cry about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it quick. I think absolutely we need to expand the council. There's too much power in too few hands and it leads to corruption. But I think it does need to be a package, as was discussed, and there needs to be major reforms, because just the fact that corruption is so normalized in City Hall that the only example that Koretz can think of is somebody trying to slide 20 grand under his door. It speaks to the larger issue, because there was, all of those planning and land use issues with Sean Bayless, his former staffer, that were published. There's the Bulgari stuff that was, called out for public corruption in council chambers. Regarding like MRT, all of his stuff, public knowledge, and we still voted him in. So, it's a larger systematic problem. And if we don't address it holistically, we're just going to have, 25 or 40 or however many more corrupt little fiefdoms. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. Did anybody want to respond to that? Okay, iPhone.
No.
Sorry, it's a different iPhone. It's somebody just called iPhone.
Is that me? Can you
Yes,
hear me?
you, whoever you are. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, Jesse R. from our Leader Neighborhood Council. Yeah, I just wanted to add, I believe now, after hearing this conversation, I believe that it is now a bad idea to grow the number of seats in the city council membership. I think unless we have rules in place that really hold each elected official accountable with liability, with lawsuits, hold them beholden to the millions of dollars or thousands of dollars that the city has lost in their corruption. And I think we need to straighten the rules, get a real independent ethics commission, and just hold these corrupt individuals accountable completely. And no more and only restrict their campaign fundings to being funded by the citizenry. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me actually let's speak about that for a moment, because I am not sure. I know that we're going to get a different sort of redistricting commission, and I know we're going to get a different looking city council, but I know that a lot of these other charter reforms are going to happen later. So Rob or Russia or Councilmember Koretz, do you happen to know if there's, and I know we've got the municipal lobbying ordinance, we're looking at that, but I'm not sure if there are other ethics reforms that are going to come at the same time, or if that's a possibility. Can anybody speak to that?
I don't know if there's other ethics reforms that are going to happen at the same time. I know that what I understand, and Rob knows this as well, I want him to chime in, is that this governance committee that's established is taking up a series of reforms. So council size increasing is one, independent redistricting is another, lobbying reform is another. So that I think they're looking at them across the board and they're taking them like one by one, and how they overlap in some areas, and in some areas they kind of don't. I've heard this a couple of times, and I do want to say, in thinking about rules around corruption and consequences, a recommendation that our office we've been kind of muddling about and is considering to see if we can weave into our set of recommendations for the independent redistricting and increasing council size, is a way to have some sort of rule or some sort of consequence for when we see bad actors, right? And what could we tie that to? And so I know that our legal team has been looking at that, and that's probably something that we would include. So I don't think that this idea of council expansion or independent redistricting precludes us from thinking about how we incorporate other consequences when we can, and then also taking them up at other times, because it is something that we're looking at and something that we're thinking about weaving into our set of recommendations that we put forward.
Okay, thank you. Rob, are you okay with me moving on?
I was just going to say there's, a number of motions that are out there. It's not clear everything that's going to be on the ballot in 2024. There's an opportunity in March and in November. It's really a matter of capacity and demand from the public to ensure that the ethics reforms and dealing with vacancies and suspension, those kinds of things also get included in the conversation.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. Okay, 213381, that person, please. Okay, I'm going to go to Saray. Oh, go ahead, 213. Oh, Hi, that's the first time he's joined us. That's the first. Okay. Saray.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'll keep it short because I know you got a lot on the agenda. First, and I have just 3 quick points and comments that I want to make. Number one, let me give a couple of snaps to Sophia for highlighting the, I want to say, atrocious SB 1137 recall for the referendum being led by, ironically, one of my former Democratic associates, Mr. Isaac Bryan. And I clearly have some strong hardline disagreements on this bill, but hopefully the young voters aren't over exasperated by his youth and charisma, and they really do the research to vote no on that, because it's going to affect our state and our uniqueness. So as much conversation that we can have about that, I would really appreciate that. I know it's not a city issue, it's a state issue, but it's really atrocious.
Okay, and it's really off topic. I'm sorry, Saray, but we're just on such a tight timeline that I'm.
Yeah, I understand, but it goes to the point of gentrification. Okay. And my other 2 points are similarly related as far as transparency. I think there needs to be more transparency between the inner workings of the county and the city. The county seems to be a little bit better when it comes to social issues and their budgeting for those issues. And my last point are the issue of community assets and how they'll be framed on a discussion of districting and redistricting. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Saray. Okay, we did it. I just want to ask about next steps. Jamie alluded to the council file, and I put the link to it in the chat. I'm actually confused about this council file. This has been split from another file, and it's not clear what it's about to me. And I mean, if it's not clear to me, it's going to be not clear to a lot of people. Rob, could you speak to that council file a little bit and what it's actually about?
Yeah, so we originally started with 2 separate council files, one related to independent redistricting and one related to expanding the city council. They were both passed, and sometimes maybe Councilmember Koretz can enlighten me, because I really don't know the ways of the city clerk sometimes and how they assign council files and create new ones, and sometimes they go to supplementals. For some reason it went to a supplemental, and that's where the CLA's report is, and that is the specific council file you need to worry about. Those other ones are there for reference, but the one that's been provided in the chat is the one you want to focus on. And there were like 30 or 35, 40 CIS statements on independent redistricting and council expansion for the other files. For the new one, there's like 2 right now, I believe. So it's extremely important. I know that takes some time, but there are some upcoming dates that are really critical. On August 10th, there is a committee meeting where they're going to be hearing presentations from the public, organizations, the academics, coalitions, etc. That's going to be 10 a.m. at City Hall on August 10th. That's going to be followed by August 21st at 10 a.m. at City Hall. The CLA is going to be bringing forward their recommendations to the committee. And that is when things get real. So they will be discussed there. And then on September 18th at 10 a.m., they plan on moving this thing out of the committee. Who knows if it will need to stay a little bit more time to marinate, but in short, they're moving towards that phase of trying to make some decisions and get towards a more concrete proposal. So it takes some time to get these CIS statements through and posted and stuff, but it's really helpful to get the ball rolling right now. I don't have a link to our sample CIS on the website right now, but I promise there will be one by the middle of the week. And if you sign up for email on fairrepla.com, you'll get an update on that.
Yeah, and I think Jamie and Rob worked on that. So thank you for that. All right. Any last parting thoughts from either Councilmember Koretz or Russia?
I mean, I don't have much to say that I haven't before, other than to thank everyone for including me and for being so involved. I think there are a lot of proposals, but the 2 that are closest to consensus are in increasing the size of the council and creating an independent redistricting I think both of those in some form need to be done, and there is a lot of value to doing so. I don't think either of those things will solve every problem that we're looking at solving, but it'll be a significant step forward.
Thank you. Any last thoughts, Russia?
No, I just want to thank you guys all for allowing us to be here and share what we know and then ask such pointed questions. I think it's really good to have these types of conversations when multiple ideas are thrown out, like multi-member districts, ranked choice voting, voucher programs. I think these are the larger conversations that we need to continue to keep having, because the collective ideas that came up here are the types of sets of recommendations that should be going and be heard in front of City Council. And I just want to thank you all for just being such active participants and allowing us to be here and being so thoughtful in your responses. So thank you.
Well, I am just so grateful to all three of you. I think this, and to everybody who participated in the conversation, and I can't wait to read the chat. Thank you. I think this has been a great conversation. It's frankly changed some of my thoughts on this. So I've learned a lot, and thank you so much for spending the time with us this evening. And now we will.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Koretz. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Russia. And you don't need to leave us. You can leave us, but you don't need to. But we are going to move to a conversation about the Vista Hermosa oil wells. Can somebody oh, thank you. Oh, that's so much better. Okay, so I'm not sure who's here from that group. I think I saw Rosalinda join. Rosalinda, are you here? Oh, and Dan is here, Dan Dudak, so that's great. I'm gonna allow that. Rosalinda, are you here? Okay, I don't hear or
yes, I'm here.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'm going to spotlight you, if that's okay with you.
Okay.
And, while I'm working on it, this will be a little bumpy, this transition, but Rosalinda is somebody that we met through the Sunrise Movement LA. And they are the ones who brought to my attention the issue with Vista Hermosa oil wells in Echo Park, which is sort of interesting because I used to live in Echo Park and I really did not know about this issue. So, and I see that Dan Dudak is here, and I don't know if other folks are here, but I'm going to spotlight Dan as well. He used to work at CalGEM, which used to be Dogger, and they're a community, he and his consulting firm, if I understand correctly, and I might be misspeaking. Oh, thank you, whoever spotlit him. Are a community partner of the Vista Hermosa folks. And so we too, if you read your emails, you know that we took a tour. The Vista Hermosa folks led us on a tour of the oil wells a month or two ago. And boy, we learned a lot. And I'd also like to probably bring into the conversation Kathy Schaefer, who is a rock star and is really working on this. She's on our energy committee, and she has drafted a motion that we're not going to talk about tonight because we're not ready to talk about it with you. But we wanted to bring this issue to your attention because we are hoping to bring something to vote on with you in the near future. So this is the first part of the conversation, and we just want you to make sure that we all understand the background. We're all sort of like, you know, on the same page. So Rosalinda, do you want to say more about to introduce yourself?
Yes, I did want to bring to your attention that Brenda is also
perfect.
On the call.
Okay, I didn't see her. Let me look for her, and I don't need to look for her. I can look for her in the list. I can spotlight.
I'm not sure if Dan's business partner Chris McCullough is also on the call.
He's here too. Okay, thank you. I will look for them. So Brenda is also in the neighborhood, and both she and Rosalinda either are or have been on the Echo Park Neighborhood Council. And Chris works with Dan, and you also used to work at CalGEM. So this is going to be a really helpful conversation. Okay, Rosalinda, I'm hoping you can give some sense of the history of this issue and the scale of the issue.
Oh, the scale is
it's insane.
Monumental.
You guys,
it is pretty crazy. So my name is Rosalinda Morales. I'm a lifetime resident of the Vista Hermosa area, also known as Temple Beaudry. My family has lived here for 3 generations and over 65 years. And I have been quite involved between myself and my colleague Brenda and my other colleague Danny Luna, whom I don't believe is here. We
And I don't
started.
think I can spotlight Brenda because I'm guessing her camera is not on. I think that's how that happens, just so you know.
Okay. We started the Vista Hermosa Heights Community Group back in 2016 when we met Dan and Chris when they were still at CalGEM. They were the project managers and the people involved on the CalGEM, then known as Dogger, portion of capping 2 badly deteriorating oil wells on Furman Street in the Vista Hermosa area. It was a 5-year effort by myself and some other neighbors here to get these oil wells capped because we were being exposed to a lot of gases and, I mean, toxic waste, basically. We live on top of a defunct oil field, which is known as the Los Angeles oil field. It was the 3rd largest oil field in the country, and it is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, oil field because one of the first wells ever dug, which I believe is 1856, is in our area, and it's still uncapped today. There are many, many oil wells that are uncapped. There is a map on the CalGEM website. It's the Well Finder map, and if you refer to it, it's dotted with purple or pink colored dots. That means anything that is uncapped. Anything that is in gray or black has been capped, but there are way more uncapped wells than there are capped wells. So we have become activists in our area because this is our legacy for future generations. We want to get this area cleaned up. Like I said, there is a rich history. One of the things that put the Los Angeles oil field on the map was that in the late 1800s, Edward Doheny had his first oil strike in the Vista Hermosa area. And from then, you know, if people look up his history, you know that he became one of the richest oil barons in this country. He is purported to have been richer than any other oil baron, but he was very quiet about it. So many people have become rich off of the oil that was dug up here. All of the wells are basically not working. There is a working oil field, which those of you that took the tour saw up on Belmont and Colton. It's owned by a very mysterious entity that never responds to any requests. There is a working oil well at the end of Furman Street that for years we have tried to get capped, but the property owners are basically slumlords. They've been in violations many, many times and have even had a lawsuit brought against them by the city attorney several years ago. Most recently, they illegally brought in a derrick and dug up stuff on the well. This we found out because we contacted CalGEM. By the time CalGEM responded, it was already too late. They'd taken the derrick down. So these are some of the things that we have to deal with. And because of our association with Dan and Chris, when we started doing the oil well tours, they became our community partners. And as is Sunrise LA is also another community partner that is very supportive on this issue with us. And we have had many actions and protests that we have staged in the area regarding the oil wells. So we are very concerned. We're happy that this group, that we came across you all and that we've made contact and that you all came to take the oil well tour. And if you ever want to come back again, we are always available to talk about the oil wells and to show people what is going on. So I'll stop at that, and maybe Dan or Chris want to say something.
Well, first, let me ask Brenda, did you want to welcome Brenda, and did you want to add anything to what Rosalinda had to say?
I think Rosalinda stated it all. She's an excellent speaker. No, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, that's totally fine. Thank you. Dan and Chris, I'd like to ask you in particular to talk about, I walked away with a lot of takeaways and a lot of questions, and I still have a lot of questions. I have not gotten my arms around this issue entirely yet, and I have been working on related issues for years, so I was shocked at how little I know. But my understanding is that there are, well, you know what, let me back up. Dan, you gave a great analogy about the straw. Can you just talk about how oil wells work and the straw and the issues with leaks?
Sure. So basically, you know, oil and gas reservoirs take millions of years to form, essentially, without getting into the specifics of it. You know, they're a result of decayed organic material in very carbon-rich seas that eventually get buried and compressed, and over millions of years, and sedimentary layers being settled on top of these decaying sea life. The reservoirs, the oil and gas will form, and an oil and gas reservoir is a reservoir because it is trapped. Decaying organic material that's not trapped will eventually find its way to the surface and you know, escape and will not become a reservoir. So when you have these oil and gas reservoirs that have been trapped for millions of years, you know, the reason is because there's a cap over the top of them, an impermeable layer of rock, or more than one layer of impervious rock on top of these reservoirs, and that's the reason why they don't come to the surface. And so when the Industrial Revolution began some 150 years ago, plus or minus, people like Doheny and so forth found evidence of oil and gas coming to the surface. And one area you can see this happening today is at the La Brea tar pits. That's an area where you have a deeper oil and gas reservoir that has leaked to the surface through faults and fractures. In other areas, the oil doesn't seep to the surface. Regardless, once we use you know, mechanical means to get to the oil and gas, what we're doing is we're removing that impervious rock layer that once trapped the oil and gas to get to it. And you know, in the turn of the last century, we were using what's called cable tool drilling. Prior to that, people were actually hand digging wells to access shallow reservoirs. But regardless, you know, whatever means you're using to get to that reservoir, you're opening up that impervious layer that has trapped this oil and gas for millions of years. Most wells are cased in a metallic iron alloy type casing, which penetrates the impervious rock layers and accesses the oil and gas at depths and brings the oil and gas to the surface. Once the oil and gas is no longer economic, an operator will typically abandon that well by putting cement or other materials in the well bore to prevent the oil and the gas from migrating to the surface. Now, back in the 1800s, there were no standards in the state or elsewhere as to how an oil producer could abandon a well. So typically what they did in those days, they would just take whatever material was on site and they would just dump it into the oil well. And that was typically dirt, rocks, cans, bottles, telephone poles, whatever they could find on site, and they would dump them into the well. When regulations came about in 1950 and thereon, the state started enacting abandonment regulations whereby certain means and methods were used to abandon wells. And today, that technology has advanced, and a typical well abandonment would involve placing cement plugs at various steps in the well bore and outside the well bore to prevent the leakage of oil and gas to the surface. But
is the well bore what I would call a straw?
yeah, typically that's a good analogy. The straw is in most cases a stainless steel or alloy material, which is typically cemented in place at various intervals in the well. Now, going back in time, the standards that were used to extract the oil, to drill the well, extract the oil, cement the casing in place, and so forth, they've changed over time. They're much more rigorous today. But the reality is, once you have that quote unquote straw in the ground that has penetrated those layers, that you can put cement in the well bore, whatever, and various other materials to keep the oil and gas from coming to the surface. But the reality is you will never be able to reproduce the natural seal that the earth took millions of years to create to keep that oil in place. So any well that is drilled and abandoned has a potential and a certain probability to leak in the future. We've seen wells in our time that were abandoned to current standards and ended up leaking the next day, literally, and would have to be re-abandoned. We've seen wells that were abandoned 10, 20, 30 years ago that were fine for 10 or 20, 30 years, and they start leaking for whatever reason. The casing corrodes, the cement cracks, we have earthquakes, which can disrupt the integrity of an abandonment, and so forth, and wells can leak. And a reservoir that has any amount of natural gas remaining in it, and most do, that gas is going to find the path of least resistance to come to the surface. And in many cases, not all, but in many cases, that path of least resistance can be an old well. So we've it's basically a scenario of the straw analogy.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if it should be Chris or Dan, but I'm hoping, and we unfortunately have very little time because we're supposed to be ending our meeting in 10 minutes when we have a few other things to do. If one of you could speak to the dangers, and the ones I'm thinking of that I'm aware of are water contamination, methane and other pollutants in the air, and fire.
This, I'll speak a little bit to that. And just to give you a quick overview of the Los Angeles City oil field. Los Angeles City oil field, which is what underlies Echo Park, is approximately 3.5 miles long by about ½ mile wide. Extends from just south of Dodger Stadium to like 2 blocks west of Vermont. And
I think I lived in it.
Just
then.
north of Wilshire Boulevard.
Maybe I still live in it. Anyway, go ahead.
So anyway, there are approximately 1,200 wells have been identified in the field. And there's probably another 500 that have not been identified because of the age of the field prior to any regulation. There are currently listed as 12 active wells with 3 operators. Cham Nathan Eddie Bateau has 1 well. PS 126 on the site has the majority of the wells, I think 10 wells, and then Temple Resources, which used to be called Vita Resources, has the other well, which is the one up on Furman Street that Rosalinda was speaking about earlier.
Watch the time, Chris.
Yes. There's about 857 idle wells, and these are wells. Most of these wells are buried under structures. So most of these wells are under existing houses or other buildings. So that's the vast majority of the wells that have been identified. And if we add those other 500 onto that, that's 80% of the wells in that field. As far as when these wells were originally drilled, Dan mentioned casing. Most of these wells were drilled without casing. That was not the standard at the time. They basically took a 12 by 12 redwood box, dug a hole, shoved it in the hole, that kind of down to about 10 feet. That kept the hole from collapsing on itself. And then, as Dan mentioned, he used cable tools and some versions of that to continue to dig and drill it out to about 1,000 foot in depth. They didn't, as Dan mentioned, they didn't use any new technology as far as the plugging and banding the wells. They just threw debris down the well, so the well would eventually bridge off, and they probably build a house on top of it. Because these, one of the issues with properly isolating these wells is that because it's there's very little to get a good bond on if you do get into the well with cement, because you really can't clean the oil off the rock very well or get a good bond where it should be sealing. So that's always a potential for leakage there. As far as drinking water, there's no classified drinking water in that area. So the city does not utilize any drinking water wells in the Echo Park area. So there's not a lot of concern with contaminated drinking water from the wells. But as I mentioned, because there's so many of these wells that are not properly abandoned, even though the field is considered depleted, it still produces some gas. And as Rosalinda could attest to, that gas can, it doesn't come out in high volumes, but it does come up, and it can be ignited when it comes to surface, although not, it won't make a big, large explosion unless it's being contained under a house or something. But it can be ignited, and a lot of this gas now has hydrogen sulfide associated with it, which is toxic. Gives a horrible odor when it's relatively safe to be around, but you can't smell it. That's when it's really bad. So those are really the hazards associated with this oil field and that. And of course, the way the city handles its development process is it really has been real strict with the developers to actually locate these wells and make sure the wells are properly abandoned before they do new construction.
That was a perfect summary. I'm going to wrap up. I know I saw Clara's chat, wishing we had more time. We will continue this conversation in our Energy Committee meeting, which we'll be talking about in moments. So you're welcome to join us there, and we will be coming back with some of our thoughts about how we can actually help, because what's happening right now, and we saw it with our own eyeballs, the city of LA is allowing developments on top of oil wells that they should. I mean, to me, it's insane what's happening right now, and super problematic. So it really is mind opening. And also, we're happy to coordinate another tour if people want to take the tour. I can't tell you how much I learned and how much I've been learning. So thank you. I know this was super fast, super short and sweet. Thank you, all of you. And I hope you can join us at our next Energy Committee, and committee meeting, and we'll continue the conversation. Any last words from any of you?
Thank you, Lisa, for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing what you're up against, and we'll keep on keeping on.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
I mean, you're welcome to stay, but you don't have to, but I'm going to unspotlight you. Okay. I am going to move to our committee announcements or committee updates, if I can get to those slides. And we will try to wrap up in the next few minutes. We probably will go a little bit over. Sometimes that happens. The first thing I wanted to talk about is this extreme heat awareness campaign that we are involved in, and that I would love for neighborhood councils. If you folks can share this with your neighborhoods, that would be amazing. It's really a huge effort to help people be able to prepare for the challenges we're having with heat. And I did send in our most recent email, which I'll be posting on our website soon, I hope. I did include the link to a way to get engaged. I don't know if I can put that link in the chat right now, but we will have, and you can also reach out to me if you can't find it or whatever, because we'd love for you folks to share this with your communities, particularly you folks who are involved with other organizations and particular neighborhood councils. Okay. Advocacy, we have a lot going on talking about air conditioners for renters, which we think is a complicated issue. Great news on the wildlife ordinance. It passed out of committee and it was robust. So we are super excited. Bad news on the zoo expansion. What we wanted not to happen looks like is happening. We have more work on that front. Sepulveda Basin, we're still working on, and democracy vouchers, we actually have good news on that front. So yes, our next meeting, because of 4th of July, will be this next Sunday, and you are all welcome to join us. Okay, energy. AJ? Is AJ?
Yeah, so yes, can you hear me, Lisa?
I can.
Okay, so just few quick announcements. So just like we touched on relation to the Vista Hermosa drilling site, we'll be continuing an ongoing discussion for the draft motion at our next committee meeting. Not much updates on how DWP can incentivize the electrification. However, on our last item, we've made a little headway in vetting a potential partner for an induction stove demonstration workshop at the Congress of Neighborhoods. So look forward to discussing more of that at our committees. As a reminder, our committee meetings are every third Thursday at 7 o'clock, and hope to see you all there.
Third Wednesday. Don't come on Thursday because we won't be there.
Right, I said third Wednesday.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, AJ, and I hope to see everybody there. Transportation, Muriel.
Oh, hello. So I got to conduct the first meeting of the month, even during the 4th of July holiday, but we held it on the 6th. We had a CD13 Transportation Committee debrief with Lisa, discussion about EV charging and a possible motion drafting for a vote. We talked about speed bump follow-ups, possible information that we could share with constituents that would like speed bumps. And then finally, we had Leonel talk about the San Fernando Road Bike Path Project and the bicycle infrastructure and pedestrian safety.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And trees, is Joanne here?
She's not, but I spoke with her today, and this is Charles. Just want to throw out really quickly, everybody keep Joanne in her thoughts. She's going through a bunch of personal stuff right now with her home being like wrecked by some stuff. And so we are taking a summer break because of what's going on with her and dealing with family stuff there. But we are also working on considerations for demolitions and development and additional guidelines that we're talking about putting together for maintaining trees and keeping trees on space and developments. And hopefully soon we'll have the full city tree inventory that can be available, and we'll do a presentation on that. Lots of good stuff though going on. If you're interested, you can contact trees@ncsa.la or contact me directly if you have any particular questions too.
Thank you, Charles. All right, I would love to ask Carrie if you want to share our event for next month, which we are very, very, very excited about.
Yeah, hi, thank you. It's been a robust conversation to listen to, and bringing it back to sustainability and clean tech. I'd like to share an exciting event that will be focused on circular economy and circular fashion solutions and education directly for your neighborhoods. It's focused on apparel, which is the largest manufacturing sector in Los Angeles. But yet still more than 95% of our clothing continues to come from overseas, and it's dominated by fast fashion companies who design with cheap pollutive materials, mainly from oil, which we talked about. But right here in LA, these textiles are clogging landfills at a rate of almost 10%. And though fast fashion tries to make us feel richer, it really makes us poorer, both financially and ecologically. So to talk about circular fashion solutions of repair, reuse, redye, redesign, redistribution, and recycling, and how that can affect our neighborhoods. So I invite you to join me, Circular Fashion LA, and co-hosting with Lisa here in the Neighborhood Councils at Lacey, the LA Clean Tech Incubator downtown in the Arts District. Where you can learn about the effects of fast fashion on your local communities, but more importantly, the solutions that are available to you through clothing swaps, hands-on redye. We have a really great redye activity planned. And you can tour the Lacey campus, which I know many of you are interested in, and learn more about Lacey and meet other local small businesses and clean tech founders in the Lacey ecosystem. And that'll be a free event on Saturday, August 12th, 2 to 5 p.m. And I'll have a QR code and registration RSVP coming up soon. But for now, you can see that flyer that Lisa showed. And I'm real happy to host everyone there to just be hands-on with circular fashion.
Thank you. Super excited about this partnership with Carrie and Lacey. So hope we get to hang out in person next month. Thank you.
In person, yes.
Yeah, kind of wild. Any other announcements? I know Saray had one, and okay, Charlene, go for it. Charlene, you are on. Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to invite everybody, and somehow I don't know how to show this, but we're having a Community Climate Action Day at Teresa Lindsay Senior Center. So we're partnering up with CD9 and with Root Down LA. And it's to create new garden spaces for the seniors at the senior center. And it's going to be all wheelchair accessible. And so they want to create we all want to create like a learning and sensory garden and vegetable garden. So we're getting donations from Kellogg. We're trying to work with local nurseries. I think some folks are taking a field trip up to Theodore Payne. And then Root Down is really going to be instrumental in just kind of doing quality control on the soil. They're going to be working with LA Compost. So this event is July 22nd. So at the center. So it's really close to Vernon and Avalon. And so everybody's excited, and it's just a starting point. So we have some kind of grant. I don't know who the grant's from. It might be from the state. There's California Climate Action Corps. So I don't know if it's through them. I'm just looking at the flyer. So maybe Lisa can help me share it. And
I forgot to get back to your email, but I am reminded now that you did email it to me, so I will respond to you.
Okay.
And Charlene, can you say which neighborhood council you are with, please?
Oh, I'm in Zapata King Neighborhood Council.
Cool.
So this is within my neighborhood council. And so we're excited just to bring something exciting. It's not the only garden, but Roots Down has a garden at the Carver Middle School, and it's just making a change. And they're trying to educate families through as far as composting, and they have events all the time. And this would be great for the seniors to have something every day, especially with the vegetable garden, but they're doing it for the community. And it's going to really help that intersection, because my church is the next intersection and we're out there cleaning up, where the family church, I'm just saying that. And it's a mess and it's like a dumping ground. So I'm thinking if we can just do one intersection at a time and just keep on doing it, we can really make it happen, and maybe bring some pride. Maybe folks won't dump their stuff so much, or maybe they'll pick it up, or maybe we can get the other businesses to lend a hand and we can actually be neighbors there. So somehow I get that out to you, because we need volunteers. There's going to be breakfast and lunch, and that's a Saturday 9 to 12. This is just the start of it, and there is going to be a RSVP and a phone. So
that is so cool, Charlene, and so cool that you folks are taking that on. I will plan. I think I'm going to be there. I shouldn't commit because I'm not looking at my calendar, but I'll plan on being there. Thank you.
Okay,
Lionel, go for it.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you, my wonderful colleagues. I do want to say in a public service announcement, Ciclavia will return on Sunday, August 20th, and Koreatown meets Hollywood. Should be a really interesting route. The last time we had that event and that area was in 2018. So it should be a really exciting route, because it's going to go through Paramount Studios, Melrose, Koreatown, Wilshire, Western, Vine. So it's on Sunday, August 20th. So from 9 to 4. So make sure you put on your calendar, and Ciclavia will return to North Hollywood in sometime September, I believe. So I look forward to seeing you there. Woo!
And you are with the Sun Valley Area Neighborhood Council.
Correct. Thank you.
All right, Clara, or is it Clara? I don't know how you say your name.
Clara.
Okay. Go for it.
I just wanted to announce the second Southern California Black Walnut Day is going to be on September 17th. They held one last year to raise awareness of the Southern California Black walnut and encourage that they not be knocked down and removed by developers. So it's going to be September 17th from 8 to 2 p.m. at Ascot Hills Park. And I'm with the Highland Park Neighborhood Council, but this is a Northeast LA event. And it's going to be followed by a bunch of hikes in the hillsides of El Sereno, Lincoln Park and Lincoln Heights and the Northeast LA areas. It's a lot of fun. There's one moonlight one, which should be really fun. So usually last year they had about 5 hikes, and then they have a final event. So hope you guys can join us. Thank you.
Oh, that sounds so cool. Thank you for sharing. Sophia.
Yeah, this Wednesday, I'll be testifying in front of the Board of Supervisors. I met this past week with Wendy Carrillo regarding Exide and Quimeco, the battery facilities that dropped over 7 million pounds of lead. So although we push for a Superfund site, the cleanup has been botched and we're still getting sick. People have died, or chronically ill, and will continue to die because the contamination has been left behind. So we're going to be focusing on the health aspects. I met with Dr. Brockbauer on this Carrillo to talk about the comorbidities, and also met with the doctors that dealt with the 9/11 implosion, because the state has failed us. This is our Flint, Michigan. And the children have to have a long-term health plan. We have people that have been living in Pampers for years and will continue to because of the poisoning and just how it affected their brains. So we're trying to focus on having the county purchase bone scanning machines, because they've lied to all of us. They say with a simple blood test, we will be able to track the exposure. And the doctors have told us that after 30 days, we will not have that information. And so that's what we're going to be lobbying for. And we hope we can all support us, that the county purchase these machines, because the way we can reach and find finally access how we've been exposed is that the lead leaches into your bones, and we can get a 96% accuracy at the highest contamination. Once it's reached your bones, it will leach into your kidneys. And anytime you're stressed out and dealing with other comorbidities, other illnesses, your lifespan will shorten. So we're talking about a genocide within the area has been expanded. We're working with USC because the Cumeco is still open, still operating. And when the Santa Ana winds blows or the ocean breeze comes, this particular matter can travel beyond the radius that the city and the county behind closed doors determined was the radius. So this will be happening on Wednesday, and keep us in your prayers and hold us up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sophia. Exide is one of the terrible, terrible examples of a failure of government across the board to effectively address a problem. It's just really bad. Devon.
Hello. I'm from Park Mesa Heights Neighborhood Council.
Which
but,
has not joined us yet. I gotta get you to get them to join us. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. This Saturday coming up, July 15th, there is the South LA Pride event. My president, forced me to do this, but gotta make this announcement. So yeah, it will be taking place at the Michelle and Barack Obama Sports Complex. The address is 5001 Obama Boulevard. The cross main streets are Obama Boulevard and King Boulevard. There'll be a picnic, dance, shop, eat, play. Just come out for a fun time. It's from 12 to 8 p.m. I'm gonna repeat the address because I think I talk too fast sometimes, but it's gonna be at the Michelle and Barack Obama Sports Complex, 5001 Obama Boulevard, 12 to 8 p.m.
Cool.
Thanks.
That
is
sounds
pretty
very
much it.
fun. Thank you for sharing.
No problem. Nice to see you.
I can't see you, but it's nice to hear your voice. Glenn.
Two things, one of which I've gotten into chat.
Okay.
The Neighborhood Council Budget Day was held on June 17th. It was very successful. And thanks for those who attended. And if you didn't, the link to the recording is on our website, budgetadvocates.org. So that's in the chat.
And I want to interrupt and say I listened to all of it before the small group part happened when I had to go. And I thought it was a really interesting and informative conversation. So honestly, I would not say this, as most of you know, if I didn't mean it. It's worth listening to.
Thanks.
Go
And
ahead.
there were some moments of inspired, candid comments, I thought, by Council President Kokorian, Controller Mejia, both, in terms of what's going on currently at City Hall and some proposals. The other thing I just want to mention is the Congress of Neighborhoods was mentioned earlier. Just know that that's an in-person event on September 23rd, and prices for a lot of the components of the program have gone up. The pay for security at City Hall, the food, the catering, etc. So we don't have enough money yet for it. So if your neighborhood council has already contributed, thank you very much. And for those that haven't, please consider agendizing for an upcoming neighborhood council meeting, contribution to the Congress of Neighborhoods. We're asking if every neighborhood council gave $1,000, we'd meet our goal, but we'll take any amount. There are sponsorship opportunities, and we do give recognition of the councils both on the website, at the event, etc. So those are all on the website, and I'll try to get that in the chat before we adjourn. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Glenn. I know we're way over time. Are there any other announcements? Okay, everybody's probably ready to go to bed. Thank you, folks. Please fill out the evaluation form, and thank you for staying with us to the very end. Great conversation. Thank all of you, and to be continued, and have a good evening. In March.